The rain was relentless, hammering against the windows of the corner cafe like an impatient suitor demanding entry. Julian Cross sat hunched over his lukewarm coffee, watching the rivulets trace paths down the glass, blurring the neon lights of the city beyond. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and the dark circles under his eyes told a story he was too tired to recite. It had been 3 years since Amelia died. 3 years of waking up every morning to an empty space beside him. 3 years of pretending that the grief had faded, that he had moved on, that he was fine. He was not fine. He was a single father to 2 beautiful, demanding, utterly chaotic children who deserved a whole father, not the fractured version of a man he had become. Aiden, his 7-year-old son, was currently using his spoon as a battering ram against a mountain of whipped cream on his hot chocolate. "Dad, watch this," he announced, his brown eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'm going to build the tallest tower in the history of the world." "I see that," Julian said, trying to muster some enthusiasm. "Just maybe don't build it all over your face this time." Sophie, his 5-year-old daughter, was meticulously sorting her crayons by color, her small brow furrowed in concentration. She had her mother's eyes, that startling shade of green that Julian still couldn't look at without feeling his chest tighten. "Dad, I'm going to draw a picture of our family," she said, her voice soft and earnest. "Mama will be in the sky, watching us. She'll be a star." Julian's throat tightened. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." He reached across the table and squeezed her tiny hand. "She would love that." The cafe door swung open, bringing with it a gust of cold wind and the unmistakable sound of heels clicking against the tiled floor. Julian didn't look up. He was too focused on preventing Aiden from launching his spoon across the room and on keeping the tears from spilling down his cheeks. But then Sophie gasped, her crayon dropping from her fingers. "Wow," she whispered. "She looks like a princess." Julian finally looked up, and the breath caught in his throat. The woman who had just walked in was nothing short of breathtaking. She was tall, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair pulled back into an impeccable chignon. Her suit was immaculate, a deep burgundy that hugged her figure in all the right places. Her heels were the kind that cost more than Julian made in a month. She carried herself with an air of unshakable confidence, her gaze sweeping across the cafe with the practiced efficiency of someone used to being in control. She was the kind of woman who made heads turn and hearts stop. And she was walking straight toward his table. "Excuse me," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Is this seat taken?" Julian blinked, suddenly aware that the cafe was packed. Every table was occupied, and she was standing there, looking at him with those piercing gray eyes, waiting for an answer. No," he said, stumbling over the word. "No, it's not taken. Please, sit." She smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips, and slid into the seat across from him. "Thank you. I wasn't about to wait 45 minutes for a table." "Rough day?" Julian asked, surprised at his own boldness. "You could say that," she replied, setting her designer handbag on the floor. "I just spent 3 hours in a boardroom with men who think innovation means adding more pie charts. I needed caffeine and something resembling human interaction before I lost my mind." Aiden, who had abandoned his whipped cream tower in favor of staring at the newcomer with unabashed curiosity, leaned forward. "Are you a princess?" The woman laughed, a genuine, melodic sound that seemed to surprise even her. "No, sweetheart. I'm not a princess." "You look like one," Sophie added, her eyes wide. "Your dress is very pretty." "Thank you," the woman said, her voice softening in a way that made Julian's heart do something strange. "That's the nicest thing anyone has said to me all day." "What's your name?" "Sophie. And this is my brother, Aiden. And that's my daddy, Julian. He's sad a lot, but he's very nice." Julian felt heat creep up his neck. "Sophie, honey. It's okay, the woman said, her gaze meeting Julian's. There was something there, something unreadable, but not unkind. I know a thing or two about being sad. My name is Genevieve. Genevieve Kane. The name struck him like a thunderbolt. Genevieve Kane. The CEO of Kane Industries. The woman who had been on the cover of every business magazine for the past 3 years. The woman who had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing, who was rumored to have a heart of ice and a will of iron. She was notorious for her ruthless business tactics, her infamously short temper, and her complete and utter lack of personal life. The tabloids called her the Diamond Diva, a moniker she apparently despised. And she was sitting across from him in a corner cafe, staring at his children with something that looked suspiciously like longing. I know who you are, Julian said, his voice barely above a whisper. Most people do, she said, a hint of wry amusement in her eyes. It's a curse, really. Hard to get a decent cup of coffee without someone asking for an autograph or a business proposal. I'm not going to ask for anything, Julian said quickly. Except maybe for you to pretend you didn't see my daughter draw a star for her dead mother. The words hung in the air, heavy and uninvited. Julian wanted to sink into the floor. Why had he said that? He never talked about Amelia. Not to strangers. Not to anyone. But there was something about Genevieve's eyes. Something that made him feel like he could be honest, like she wouldn't judge him. Genevieve's expression shifted. The polished armor slipped, just a fraction, and he caught a glimpse of something raw beneath. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For your loss. I can't imagine how hard that must be. It is, Julian admitted. But I have these two to keep me going. He reached out and ruffled Aiden's hair. They're the only reason I get out of bed in the morning. They're beautiful, Genevieve said, and there was a wistfulness in her voice that Julian didn't miss. You're lucky. I know, he said. I'm the luckiest man in the world. Even on the hard days. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the waitress, who took Genevieve's order with an eagerness that bordered on reverence. Julian found himself stealing glances at her as she sipped her cappuccino, watching the way her fingers wrapped around the cup, the way her eyes softened when she looked at his children. She was a contradiction, a woman of immense power and wealth, yet there was a vulnerability in her that she seemed determined to hide. Can you draw a unicorn? Aiden asked Genevieve, suddenly appearing at her elbow with a crayon in his hand. I'm not much of an artist, Genevieve admitted. But I can try. She took the crayon and began sketching something on a napkin. Her strokes were hesitant at first, then more confident. Within minutes, she had drawn a surprisingly decent unicorn, complete with a shimmering horn and a rainbow mane. Wow! Aiden exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. You're the best artist ever. Thank you, Genevieve said, a genuine smile spreading across her face. I had a lot of practice when I was a kid. It was the only way I could escape. Escape from what? Sophie asked, her voice innocent. Genevieve paused, her smile faltering. From a world that wasn't always kind, she said finally. But that was a long time ago. Now I draw unicorns for adorable little boys who remind me why the world is still worth being in. Julian watched the exchange with something akin to awe. This was not the woman the tabloids described. This was not the ice queen who supposedly crushed her competitors without mercy. This was a woman who had clearly known pain, who had built walls so high that no one could scale them. Yet somehow, in the span of a single conversation, his children had managed to knock a few bricks loose. The rain had finally stopped by the time Genevieve stood to leave. She left $100 bill on the table, far more than her cappuccino cost. You don't have to do that, Julian said, reaching for his wallet. Consider it a gift, she said. For the best company I've had in years. She looked at his children, her expression softening. Take care of your daddy, okay? He's a good man. We will, Sophie promised solemnly. Genevieve turned to leave, but then she paused, looking back at Julian. I don't know if this is forward of me, she said, but I was wondering, maybe I could see you again. All of you. She gestured vaguely at the children. I don't have any family of my own, and I've always wondered what it would be like to spend a Saturday at the park. If that's not too strange to ask. Julian felt his heart do a strange flip-flop. I don't think that's strange at all, he said. I think that's the most normal thing anyone's asked me in a long time. They exchanged numbers, a transaction that felt far more intimate than it had any right to be. And Genevieve walked out of the cafe, leaving Julian with the lingering scent of her perfume and the unsettling realization that he was already looking forward to seeing her again. The next Saturday arrived with the kind of sunshine that seemed to mock Julian's anxieties. He had spent the entire week overthinking the encounter, convincing himself that Genevieve would never actually show up, that she had only made the offer out of politeness, that a woman like her would have no interest in a struggling single father and his chaotic children. But then his phone buzzed with a text, "Park, 2 p.m. I'll bring snacks. Don't be late." Smiling face with smiling eyes. She was there when they arrived, sitting on a bench with a picnic basket and a stack of colorful plastic plates that looked like they belonged in a child's birthday party. She had changed out of her power suits and into a pair of jeans and a simple white blouse. She looked younger, more approachable, and utterly breathtaking. You came, Julian said, unable to keep the surprise out of his voice. I said I would, Genevieve replied, shrugging. I keep my promises. They spent the afternoon chasing Aiden around the playground, pushing Sophie on the swings, and eating sandwiches that Genevieve had apparently made herself. Julian was shocked to discover that she was a surprisingly good cook, and even more shocked to discover that she had actually listened to Sophie's endless chatter about butterflies and Aiden's obsession with dinosaurs. This is the best day ever, Aiden declared as they were packing up to leave. Can we do this again, Daddy? Please. Julian looked at Genevieve, who was watching the children with an expression of pure wonder. I think that would be okay, he said. If Genevieve wants to. I would love to, she said softly. I haven't had this much fun in I don't know how long. And so it became a routine. Every Saturday, they would meet at the park or the zoo or the children's museum. Genevieve would show up with an elaborate picnic, or tickets to the latest exhibit, or a new board game that she insisted they all play together. The children adored her, Aiden because she never told him to be quiet, Sophie because she seemed to genuinely care about every single thing she said. And Julian. Julian was falling for her. Hard. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely unexpected. As the weeks turned into months, Julian began to notice small things about Genevieve that made his heart ache. He noticed the way she flinched whenever someone raised their voice, the way she always sat with her back to the wall, the way she never talked about her childhood. He noticed the way she would sometimes stare at Sophie and Aiden with an expression of such profound longing that it made his chest tighten. There were walls around her heart, walls so thick and high that even he couldn't see over them. And he desperately wanted to climb them, to tear them down, to show her that she didn't have to be alone anymore. But the past has a way of catching up with you. Julian had always known that his in-laws, Richard and Margaret Ashford, disapproved of him. They had never forgiven him for marrying their daughter against their wishes, and they had made no secret of their belief that he was not good enough for their precious Amelia. After Amelia's death, they had tried to gain custody of the children, arguing that Julian was an unfit father. He had fought them in court and won, but the battle had left scars. Richard and Margaret had not spoken to him since, until now. Julian was in his apartment, putting the finishing touches on a model bridge he was building for Aiden's science project, when his phone rang. It was Richard Ashford. Julian stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He had been dreading this call for years. Julian, Richard's voice was cold, clipped. We need to talk. About the children. I'm not giving them up, Julian said immediately. You can't make me. I'm not asking you to, Richard replied. But I'm asking you to consider what's best for them. What's best for our family. I've done some research, Julian. I know about the woman you've been spending time with. Genevieve Kane. Julian's blood ran cold. What about her? She's not suitable, Richard said flatly. She's a businesswoman, a workaholic. She has no experience with children. And she's been divorced twice, Julian. Twice. What makes you think she's going to stick around? What makes you think she's not going to break your children's hearts? That's not fair, Julian said, his voice shaking. You don't know her. I know her type, Richard shot back. And I know that you can't afford to be reckless. My grandchildren have already lost their mother. They can't lose their father to some fling. I've seen the newspaper articles, Julian. Everyone is talking about it. They're calling her the Ice Queen, and you're just another one of her conquests. She'll use you, Julian. She'll use you and then discard you when she gets bored. And where will that leave my grandchildren? Broken. Just like you're about to be. The call ended with a click, and Julian sat in the darkness, his mind reeling. Richard was wrong. He had to be wrong. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were spreading like wildfire. He couldn't sleep that night. He tossed and turned, replaying Richard's words over and over in his head. What if he was right? What if Genevieve was just using him? What if she really was incapable of love? He tried to ignore the doubts. He tried to tell himself that Genevieve was different, that she genuinely cared about him and the children. But then he saw the news. A front-page article in the city's biggest newspaper, with a headline that made his stomach drop, Genevieve Kane, the Ice Queen melts for a single dad? Or just another business acquisition? The article painted Julian as a gold digger, an opportunist who had manipulated a vulnerable woman for her money. It painted Genevieve as a calculating predator who was using the children to soften her public image. There were quotes from anonymous sources, rumors about her past relationships, speculation about her motives. Julian felt sick. How could anyone be so cruel? How could anyone twist something so beautiful into something so ugly? He didn't know what to do. So he did what he always did when things got hard. He shut down. He pulled away. He stopped answering Genevieve's calls, stopped responding to her texts. He convinced himself he was protecting his children, protecting himself, protecting her from the inevitable heartbreak. He told himself it was for the best, that it was better to end things now before they got too deep. He couldn't go through another loss. He couldn't put his children through another loss. Genevieve didn't give up easily. She showed up at his apartment, her face pale with concern. "Julian, please," she begged through the intercom. "Talk to me. Whatever it is, we can fix it. I'm not going anywhere." But Julian couldn't open the door. He couldn't face her. He was too ashamed. Too scared. So he stood on the other side, his forehead pressed against the cold wood, tears streaming down his face, and listened to her walk away. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of Julian's life. The silence in his apartment was deafening. The children asked about Genevieve constantly, and he had no answers for them. He worked himself to exhaustion, hoping that sleep would bring relief, but the nightmares just got worse. He dreamed of Genevieve, her eyes filled with betrayal, asking why he had left. He dreamed of Aidan and Sophie, their faces twisted in confusion, wondering where their friend had gone. Then, everything changed in a single moment. It was a Thursday afternoon, unseasonably warm, and Julian was in his studio, trying to lose himself in his work. He was an architect, designing residential homes for families who wanted to fill their houses with laughter and children. It was a bittersweet profession for a man who felt like he had failed at his own family. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again, a frantic, insistent rhythm. Finally, he looked at the screen. It was Genevieve. "Julian, I know you don't want to talk to me," the message read. "But I'm at the hospital. Sophie is here. She had an accident at school. She's asking for you. Please come." The world stopped. Sophie. His daughter. His precious, beautiful daughter. Julian didn't think. He grabbed his keys and ran, his heart pounding in his throat. The hospital was a blur of white walls and fluorescent lights. Julian found Genevieve in the waiting room, her face streaked with tears. Sophie was in the emergency room, a broken arm and a mild concussion, but she would be okay. She had been riding her bike too fast, ignoring the rules, and she had crashed into a curb. She was in pain, she was scared, and she was asking for Genevieve. The nurses didn't know who Genevieve was, so they had called her when they found her number in Sophie's emergency contact list. "How did you get here so fast?" Julian asked, his voice hoarse. "I was already nearby," Genevieve said, her voice trembling. "I was coming to see you. I've been coming every day, Julian. I never stopped coming. I just didn't have the courage to knock." Julian felt the walls he had built around his heart crumble. "Genevieve. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I shut you out. I was scared. Richard called me. He said you weren't suitable. He said you would break our hearts. And I believed him. I was a fool." "Richard?" Genevieve's eyes widened. "Richard Ashford? He's the one who told you to push me away?" "Yes," Julian admitted. "He said you would never stick around. That you were a businesswoman who didn't know how to love." Genevieve laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Richard Ashford doesn't know anything about me. He doesn't know that I've been alone for 40 years. He doesn't know that I've never loved anyone the way I love you and your children. He doesn't know that I've been fighting my whole life to prove that I'm worth something." "What do you mean?" Julian asked, his heart aching. "I grew up poor," Genevieve said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father was an alcoholic who left when I was 5. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. She died when I was 16, and I was put into foster care. I bounced from home to home, never staying anywhere long enough to make friends or feel safe. I built my empire because I was terrified of ending up like my mother, scared, alone, powerless. I thought if I had money, I would be safe. But I was wrong. Money doesn't keep you warm at night. Money doesn't make you feel loved. You do, Julian. You and Sophie and Aiden. You are the only family I've ever had." Tears were streaming down Julian's face. "I was such an idiot. I let my fear control me. I let Richard control me. I'm so sorry." "You don't have to apologize," Genevieve said. "I know why you did it. I understand. But from now on, we don't let fear win. We don't let anyone tell us what we can and can't have. Together, we're stronger than all of them." Sophie was finally admitted to a private room, her arm in a bright pink cast. The first thing she did when she saw Genevieve was smile, her eyes lighting up despite the pain. "Genevieve. You came," she exclaimed. "Of course I came," Genevieve said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. And I brought you something." She pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped box from her bag. "It's a present. I was going to give it to you at the park, but I think you need it now." Sophie opened it with her good hand, revealing a silver locket. Inside, there was a tiny picture of Sophie and Aiden, a picture that Genevieve had obviously taken during one of their Saturdays at the park. Now you can carry us with you wherever you go, Genevieve said, her eyes misty. Sophie hugged her fiercely, her cast awkwardly digging into Genevieve's side. Thank you, Genevieve. I love you. Genevieve's breath hitched. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. Aidan came running into the room, his face flushed. Sophie. Are you okay? He stopped when he saw Genevieve. Genevieve. You're here too. Of course I'm here, Genevieve said, pulling him into a hug. I wouldn't miss it for the world. That night, after Sophie had been discharged and the children were tucked into bed, Julian and Genevieve sat on the porch of his apartment, staring at the stars. The city was quiet, the streets empty, the silence between them comfortable. I never thought I could feel this way again, Julian admitted. After Amelia died, I thought my heart had died with her. I thought I was incapable of love. But then I met you, and everything changed. Genevieve was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. I was going to save this for a better time, she said, but I think now is as good a time as any. She opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. It was a thin silver band with a small diamond, a ring that had clearly been chosen with care and love. I know we haven't known each other long, she said, her voice trembling. But I also know that I don't want to spend another day without you. I love you, Julian. I love your children. And I want to be your family. Will you marry me? Julian stared at the ring, then at Genevieve, and the tears that had been threatening all night finally spilled over. Yes, he said, his voice breaking. Yes, Genevieve. 1,000 times yes. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a kiss that tasted of salt and hope and a love that had been a long time coming. The wedding was a small, intimate affair in the same park where they had spent their first Saturday together. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the children were running around with wild abandon. Aidan was the ring bearer, carrying the rings on a velvet pillow with all the solemnity a 7-year-old could muster. Sophie was the flower girl, scattering petals with the enthusiasm of a tiny fairy. Richard Ashford was conspicuously absent, but Julian didn't care. He didn't need Richard's approval. He had Genevieve, and that was enough. Genevieve wore a simple, white dress that she had bought off the rack, and Julian wore the same suit he had worn to his first job interview. The reception was catered by the same cafe where they had first met, and the cake was adorned with a hand-drawn unicorn, courtesy of Aidan. The community center volunteers had decorated the pavilion with fairy lights and flowers, and the children from the center sang songs during the ceremony. I thought I had it all, Genevieve said, her hand in Julian's as they stood before the officiant. I had money, power, respect. But I was empty. I was alone. And then I met you. You showed me what it means to love. You showed me that family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up, who fight for you, who never give up. I promise to be that person for you and our children. I promise to never let fear win. I promise to love you for the rest of my life. Julian's voice cracked as he spoke his vows. I promise to be your partner, your best friend, your rock. I promise to always show up, always fight for you, always let you in. I promise to be the father our children deserve and the husband you deserve. You are my home, Genevieve. My heart. My everything. Sophie and Aidan ran up and hugged them both, and the crowd erupted in applause. It was the happiest moment of Julian's life. 5 years later, Julian stood in the same park, watching his children play with their adopted baby sister, Abigail. Genevieve had always wanted a daughter, and fate had finally smiled upon them when a young woman from the community center had asked Genevieve to adopt her baby. It had been a long, complicated process, but it had been worth every sleepless night, every anxious moment. Abigail was perfect, with her mother's dark curls and her father's mischievous grin. Julian had stepped down from his architecture firm and now worked for the newly merged Cross Cane Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping underprivileged children. He was happier than he had ever been. He had found meaning in his work, purpose in his family, and love in the most unexpected place. "Look at them," Genevieve said, slipping her hand into Julian's. "They're the best thing I've ever done. And I didn't even have to give birth to them." "That's the thing about family," Julian said, squeezing her hand. "It's not about biology. It's about love. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other every single day." "I love you, Julian Cross," Genevieve said, her voice soft. "I love you too, Genevieve Cross," he replied. "More than you'll ever know." They watched the sun set over the park, the sky painted in hues of gold and pink, their children's laughter echoing through the air. Julian had been broken once. He had lost his wife, lost his hope, lost his way. But Genevieve had walked into his life at the exact moment he needed her most, and she had shown him that love was worth the risk. She had shown him that he could be whole again. And as he looked at his wife, at their children, at the beautiful chaos of their life together, Julian knew that this was exactly where he was meant to be. This was his family. This was his home. And he was never letting go. The sun had fully set now, and the stars were beginning to appear, twinkling like tiny diamonds scattered across a velvet sky. Sophie was the first to notice them. "Look, Daddy. The first star," she exclaimed, pointing with her good arm. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Julian said. Sophie closed her eyes, scrunching up her face with concentration. A moment later, she opened them. "I wish that we could stay like this forever," she said. "All of us together." Genevieve knelt down beside her, her eyes glistening. "That's a beautiful wish, sweetheart. And I think it's going to come true." "Really?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide. "Really," Genevieve said. "Because I'm going to make sure of it. I'm never leaving you. None of you. You're stuck with me forever." Aiden cheered, running circles around them. "Yay! Genevieve is stuck with us forever." Julian laughed, pulling his family into a group hug. He had never felt more complete. He had never felt more at peace. The pain of losing Amelia would always be with him, but it no longer defined him. He had found love again, a different kind of love, a love that had healed him in ways he never thought possible. And as the stars continued to appear, one by one, Julian looked at his wife and thought about the moment they had first met, the rain, the cafe, the way she had looked at his children like they were the most precious things in the world. He had been so sure he wasn't looking for love. He had been so sure he would never love again. But fate had other plans. Fate had sent him Genevieve, and she had changed everything. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Julian and Genevieve sat together on the couch, his arms wrapped around her. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" she asked, her voice drowsy. "For walking into that cafe," he said. "For not giving up on me. For being the best thing that ever happened to me." Genevieve turned to look at him, her gray eyes soft in the dim light. "I didn't walk into that cafe by accident, Julian. I walked in because I had been watching you for weeks. I had seen you at the park with the children, at the school drop-off, at the grocery store. I was drawn to you. I didn't know why. But I couldn't stay away." Julian was stunned. "You knew about me before we met?" "I knew about you," she admitted. "I knew you were a good man. A good father. A good person. And I knew I had to meet you. It was the bravest thing I've ever done." Julian kissed her then, a long, slow kiss that said everything words couldn't. "I love you, Genevieve," he said when they finally pulled apart. "I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone." I love you too, she said. And I always will. They fell asleep in each other's arms, wrapped in the warmth of their love, the peace of their home, and the promise of a future filled with happiness. Julian had found his happy ending. And he knew, deep in his heart, that this was just the beginning.